Hello friends, I'm Shelly Clough, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to paint these moody florals, as I'm calling them, with this dramatic blue background. So the first thing we're going to do, this feels elementary, but I'm going to show you how I tape my paper down because it matters. So what I will do is I will take my tape, hold it really tight, and kind of hover it over the paper so I can almost see through to make sure I've got it lined up nice and straight. Then I press it down. And after I press it down, you can see me running my fingernail along the edge. What that does is it locks in that tape nice and tight. So I'm not going to have any water seeping underneath of it. So I'll go through and do this to all four sides. Another option, if you want to be extra precise and want to make sure that your edges are all perfectly even when you take the tape off, is to just take a ruler and a little pencil and mark, like a 1/4 inch in on every side, and then line your tape up with those marks if you are nervous about eyeballing it like this. I also get a lot of questions about my tape. This is a tape that I really enjoy. It is called Pro Art tape. It's specifically an artist tape. What I like about it is that it seems to have a really great balance of adhering really tightly so that it's not peeling up while I'm painting and I don't ever get leakage under my line, but also that it comes off pretty clean as long as I pull it off in the right way. And I'll show you more about that later. So to start this painting, I wanted to paint these bright pink roses because I feel like that bright pink against a dark blue is just a really beautiful contrast. So the pink that I'm mixing is Quinacradone Magenta and Opera Rose. These are both by Winsor Newton, and they are from their professional line of colors. The Opera Rose is like this fluorescent pink, and the Quinacridone has almost a purple hue to it. And between the two of those is just a perfect pink in my opinion. So I've got those mixed up, and to start my rose, I will start with, I know you often hear C strokes, like the shape of a C when you're making a rose. And when I start my rose, they are not so much C's as just little marks. What I'm trying to go for is really tight markings that leave a little bit of white space in between. It's really important not to have too much white space, but not to have too little. So I'll start with those really small marks, and then I'll begin with those sort of C strokes where you can see that each stroke is tapered. It starts thin, and then it gets wide in the middle, and then it tapers off again at the end. And I'm sort of layering them on each other. You don't want to let those ends touch one another. You want them to lay on top of one another so that those pointy little ends are a little bit free. And I'm just leaving a little bit of white in between, and then when I'm all done creating the shape, I'll go through and I'll tap in a little extra color that's darker to give some contrast and dimension by making the center of my rose darker. So here's starting rose number 2, going through and again making kind of some of those little marks in the middle, very tight, quite small. And then as I work my way outward, those strokes get longer, they get wider, and they also get just a little bit lighter. I'll add some more water to my brush as I go to help with that gradient of dark to light as I go from the inside to the outside of my rose. And again, you'll notice here little bits of white space that I'm leaving in between. I don't need a ton, but enough to help create the crisp shape of some of those petals. And I'm letting myself go all the way to the edges on these roses and painting just a little over the tape. And that way it helps my brain sort of remember that it's a whole rose and I'm not trying to sort of squish it up against the side. All right, now that I've got my initial roses done, I'm going to mix up a green for some leaves. One of my favorite greens to use is a mix of Viridian green and then adding burnt umber to complement it, because Viridian green is a very vibrant kind of phthalo green, and it's just too vibrant to look realistic in a botanical painting. But if you add enough brown to it, it creates this rich, more olive tone, and it's lovely. So this is one of my favorite color combinations. Also, brown is just a great trick. If you feel like your colors are too vibrant, add a little touch of brown to them and see how you like it. It's a really nice shortcut to muting a color a bit. So when I go to make my leaves, I'm using this basic stroke of kind of starting with light pressure, pressing down a little harder to get a wide center, and then keeping it nice and thin at the ends. I like to leave just a little bit of white space in the middle of my leaves, and I'm just sort of placing a few of these down wherever feels balanced to me. It's sort of how I'm deciding to do that. Now to make sure that I have enough visual interest in this painting, I'm going to add a little bit of what I call a filler floral. And I'm going to do that with some of this purple lake color. This is again by Winsor & Newton. It's from their Cotman line. And it's a really fun purple color. And I'm just adding a bit of water to it so it's not too dark. And then a little bit of French ultramarine blue to get more of a royal purple color out of it. And I'm going to go and make what I call circle flowers. They're kind of oblong. It's almost like lopsided donuts is a good way to describe them. So one side's usually fatter than the other side. I try to make them a little imperfect as I go around, but they're really simple and they are a great way to add a little bit of something to a painting if you feel like you have an awkward gap that needs to be filled. So I'll lay down the initial circles and then I will mix up a darker purple and tap a little bit of that in the center to again give a little bit of dimension to those florals. The last thing I'm going to do to these florals is, now that my roses are totally dry, I'm going to add one more layer of dimension to the center of those. So I've mixed a darker version of that same color I used earlier, Quinacradone Magenta and Opera Rose, and I'm just going through and mimicking the same kind of strokes I did at the beginning, but making them a smaller portion of the strokes I laid down before. So maybe over a third of what I did, and focusing that mostly in the middle of the rose. And again, it just brings out a little more dimension on those roses. Now that I've got my florals done, I can go ahead and start with that dramatic blue background that we're going to be doing. So to mix this color up, one, I want it to be pretty opaque. I'm going to be gathering a lot of pigment as I make this color. So sometimes you're working in watercolor that is quite translucent. This, I want it to be pretty thick. So I'm mixing a combination of indigo. Again, all these colors today are by Winsor & Newton. Indigo with a little bit of Payne's gray, and then if I feel like it gets too dull, I've added a little bit of Prussian blue to that. So the primary color is indigo, and then I'm sort of pulling it more or less vibrant with either the Prussian blue or the Payne's gray. So once I get it mixed in, this is the part of the painting where you want to like pop in a podcast or turn on a movie and you just get meditative and start. You're going to paint and cover all of the white space on the paper. So I'm going through, and there are some tricks to this to help make sure that your wash, that blue wash in the background, ends up looking even, because it does take so long. It's going to be drying while you're working. And that's how you can start to create some texture to it. So first what I do is try to, pick an area I'm working in, and I go through and I outline the more difficult portions to paint really carefully. So I'm getting here in all the little nooks and crannies. And once I get that outline, I can sort of be less careful as I fill in the middle. And what will happen is, if it starts to dry, I will re-wet an area where that line is starting to dry. And we'll see that here in just a second. Right now what I'm doing is, while it's still wet, I'm taking some extra blue, and do you see the tapping motion I made? That is going to create some fun blooms in the paint as it dries. So I want it to look sort of uneven and a little bit funky. I'm working more wet than I usually do, so I'm okay with this paint sort of going everywhere. The last thing I want is for it to be super dry. So that's the main effort that I am trying to make. And so here, as I come to where it's touching the line that has already started to dry, it will do kind of some funny layering there. And I'll just make sure to loosely blob my brush over an area like that, so it looks more organic and it doesn't look like a harsh line anywhere. So now that we've got the basic mechanics down, I'm going to time lapse through the rest of me filling this background. And it actually skips just a tiny bit at the end because I went to move my camera angle and accidentally turned it off. But it looks really time consuming. This is actually only 5 to 10 minutes worth of work, so don't despair. It's kind of fun. Now this is the finished product of filling in the background, and I'm going to show you how I go and peel my tape off. The main thing that I want you to notice is the angle that I pull the tape off on. I'm careful to do it at a 45-degree angle. So I want to make sure I'm not doing it at 90 degrees. The tape is angled away from the paper at 45 degrees, and that helps a lot to make sure you get a nice clean pull. Another thing that can be helpful sometimes if there's a painting I've spent a ton of time on or am really worried about the paper tearing. It does happen sometimes, and so if I'm worried about it, I'll run a blow dryer over the tape. It loosens that adhesive and then it comes off super clean. And you can see we got nice crisp edges on this painting. So here is the finished product with a bunch of other paintings like this that I made. I hope you subscribe and feel free to drop any questions below.